right, strap in, everybody. Today we are going deep on Elon Musk, and more specifically, his no-holds-barred conversation with Joe Rogan. Back on JRE number 2223. We got the notes, we got the highlights, and let me tell you, this one is a wild ride.
Oh yeah, it's not every day you get this kind of behind-the-scenes look at really what makes someone like Elon Musk tick.
Yeah, for sure. And this conversation, it really goes everywhere. I mean, climate change, Twitter, the 2024 election, even AI.
It's like a snapshot of
yeah,
the anxieties of our time, you could say.
Right. Okay, so one of the things that really jumped out at me was Musk's take on meat and climate change. He basically says that, cutting back on burgers isn't going to make a measurable difference, which, I mean, isn't that kind of bold statement given, everything we hear about the climate crisis?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because he's not denying climate change outright, but he's definitely challenging, but sort of the conventional wisdom about, what the solutions are. Like he's saying, show me the data, prove to me that going vegan is actually going to move the needle on this.
Which, I mean, that's classic Elon, right? Always demanding the evidence. Okay, but is he right, though? I mean, does cutting back on meat actually make a difference when it comes to, global warming?
Well, you see, that's where things get complicated. Livestock farming, yeah, it does contribute to emissions, but its overall impact is actually very hotly debated.
Really?
Yeah, there's so many factors at play. I mean, you have land use, transportation, different farming practices, and trying to isolate just the impact of meat consumption. Yeah, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I can see that.
So you have some studies arguing that, yeah, plant-based diets could significantly reduce emissions, and others suggesting that the benefits might be, less dramatic.
Okay, so it sounds like there's no easy answer here, but
yeah,
I feel like Musk's point is more about, individual action versus systemic change.
Exactly. He seems to be saying that, focusing on what individuals eat might actually distract us from the bigger issues, like our reliance on fossil fuels or unsustainable industrial practices.
Right. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about another hot button issue. Twitter, or I guess we should say X now. Musk has been very vocal about his reasons for buying it, and it seems like freedom of speech is at the top of that list.
Yeah. What's fascinating is how he ties his concerns about censorship back to his own experiences on Twitter.
Yeah.
Before the acquisition, he claims to have witnessed firsthand how algorithms and policies were being manipulated, you could say, especially during the Trump era.
Right, and he brings up some very specific examples too, like the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story and that whole Find People hoax, where he says the media basically took Trump's words out of context.
Exactly, and he also alleges that, left-leaning organizations were organizing these advertiser boycotts to pressure Twitter into silencing voices that they disagreed with.
Yeah, it's like this whole situation really fueled his belief that, a powerful few were controlling the narrative.
Right, stifling dissent and trying to manipulate a public opinion.
So he saw buying Twitter as a way to, level the playing field, to create a space where different viewpoints could be heard.
Yeah, that's his core argument. It's a battle for the future of free speech, he says. A fight against this dangerous trend towards silencing anyone who challenges the status quo.
Okay, but, I mean, isn't that a bit of a slippery slope? I mean, where do you draw the line between protecting free speech and allowing harmful content to spread?
That is the million-dollar question. And it's one that, honestly, Musk himself has struggled with since taking over. He's trying to walk this tightrope between promoting free expression and preventing the platform from becoming a haven for, hate speech and misinformation.
Right, which, I mean, is a delicate balance to strike.
Oh, absolutely. And it's drawn a lot of criticism from both sides, really.
And speaking of criticism, Musk definitely doesn't shy away from calling out what he sees as government overreach. He even uses the term Orwellian to describe his experience with the Department of Justice and their lawsuit against SpaceX.
Right. And what's interesting about this example is how he connects it back to this larger point about freedom versus control. He claims that SpaceX is being sued for not hiring asylum seekers, even though it's actually illegal for them to hire non-permanent residents because of the sensitive nature of their work.
So he's basically saying the government is setting him up to fail.
That's exactly his argument. He believes SpaceX is stuck in this damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. Wow. Which, illustrates his belief that the government is using these legal processes to punish him for not aligning with their agenda.
It's like he's drawing a parallel between this legal battle and what he sees happening on social media, in both cases. He believes powerful institutions are using their authority to stifle dissent.
Exactly, to enforce conformity.
And that brings us back to this core idea of freedom versus control, which honestly feels like a recurring theme throughout this entire conversation.
Absolutely. It's like he sees this pattern of powerful entities, whether it's just the government, the media, big tech, all trying to control the narrative.
Okay, so we've got climate change, freedom of speech, government overreach. Where does Musk go from there?
Well, things get even more interesting when he starts talking about the 2024 election.
Yeah.
And, well, what he sees is this coordinated effort to undermine American democracy.
Wait, is he suggesting that the election is rigged?
He doesn't use that exact language, no. But he does express deep concerns about what he sees as a concerted effort to manipulate election outcomes, specifically by Democrats.
Right.
And he focuses on immigration as a key part of this alleged strategy.
Hold on, immigration, how does that tie into the 2024 election?
Well, Musk claims that Democrats are deliberately encouraging illegal immigration into swing states as a way to bolster their voter base. He cites government data showing significant increases in illegal immigration in these key areas and argues that this is a deliberate tactic to shift the electorate in their favor.
Okay, I mean, that's a pretty serious accusation.
It is.
But is there any evidence to support it?
Well, Musk points to California as a kind of blueprint for what he fears could happen nationwide. He claims that California's elimination of voter ID requirements is part of this strategy, making it easier for illegal immigrants to vote and potentially tipping the scales in favor of Democrats.
But isn't that a pretty big leap? I mean, eliminating voter ID requirements is a complex issue, and there are a lot of arguments for and against it. It's not necessarily about facilitating voter fraud, right?
That's true. And it's important to note that correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because there's been an increase in illegal immigration and Democrats support policies like eliminating voter ID requirements doesn't mean those two things are directly linked or that there's some grand conspiracy at play.
Right, so we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions here.
Absolutely. It's crucial to analyze Musk's claims critically, examine the evidence he presents, and consider alternative explanations.
Yeah, okay.
And it's also worth noting that he's not alone in his concerns about election integrity. There's a growing distrust of the electoral process across the political spectrum, fueled by misinformation, partisan rhetoric, and honestly, a lack of transparency.
So how do we sift through all this noise and figure out what's really going on?
That's the challenge, isn't it? We need to be critical thinkers, skeptical consumers of information, and willing to engage with diverse perspectives, even if they challenge our own beliefs. It's not about blindly accepting or rejecting Musk's claims, but about, digging deeper, asking tough questions, and forming our own informed opinions.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We got Musk's take on climate change, his fight for free speech on Twitter, his concerns about government overreach, and his, explosive claims about the 2024 election. What else is on the agenda for this deep dive?
Well, buckle up, because Musk doesn't hold back when it comes to criticizing the pharmaceutical industry, particularly their handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. He also shares some pretty mind-blowing predictions about the future of AI and a world where robots might outnumber humans.
Oh, man, this is getting more and more fascinating by the minute. I can't wait to unpack all of this. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll dive right back in.
So Musk's skepticism of authority, it's not just limited to the government. He also he takes aim at the pharmaceutical industry, and particularly how they handle the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't hold back there. He and Rogan, they spend a good chunk of this conversation, talking about their concerns about big pharma and their profit motives and what they see as this lack of transparency in medical research.
Yeah, and it's interesting how he ties this back to his larger point about freedom and control. He sees the pharmaceutical industry as another example of a powerful entity kind of dictating what people should believe and how they should live their lives.
He even brings up that Vioxx scandal, where it came out that the company, they knew about the potential heart risks, but they kept selling the drug anyway. I mean, that's a pretty disturbing example of profits being put ahead of people's health.
Yeah, it definitely casts a shadow over the entire industry. And Musk, he uses this example to highlight what he sees as this pattern of corporate greed, and this willingness to prioritize profits over patient safety.
Okay, but isn't there a danger in you know, painting the entire industry with such a broad brush. I mean, there are ethical pharmaceutical companies out there, right? Companies that are genuinely trying to develop life-saving treatments.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
It's important to avoid generalizations.
Yeah.
But I think Musk's point is more about the need for greater transparency and accountability within the industry as a whole.
Right.
He's calling for more rigorous oversight, independent research, and a willingness to challenge the status quo,
Right.
even when it comes to widely accepted medical practices.
I mean, he and Rogan, they also expressed some skepticism about the COVID-19 vaccines, too. They raised concerns about their long-term safety and efficacy. They even suggest that these alternative treatments, like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, were unfairly dismissed by the medical establishment, maybe because of pressure from Big Pharma to promote their own more profitable solutions.
Right, and that's a pretty controversial claim, of course.
It is. So is there any evidence to support that?
Well, the efficacy of those alternative treatments is still very hotly debated within the scientific community. Some studies, they have suggested potential benefits, but others have found them to be ineffective or even harmful. I think the key takeaway here is that we need more research, more data, and a more open discussion to really determine what works and what doesn't.
So it sounds like Musk, he's not saying the vaccines are definitely dangerous, but he's raising questions about the process, about transparency, and whether those alternative viewpoints were given a fair hearing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about encouraging critical thinking, questioning authority, and demanding more evidence, especially when it comes to something as important as our health.
Right. It seems like that's a recurring theme with Musk, Don't just blindly accept what you're told. Do your own research and challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. And this independent thinking, it also extends to his views on the future, particularly the rise of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, he's known for his pretty bold predictions about AI. I mean, didn't he once say that AI is potentially more dangerous than nuclear weapons?
Yeah, he has expressed concerns about the potential for AI to surpass human intelligence and become a threat to our existence.
Yeah.
But in this conversation, he focuses more on the practical implications of AI, specifically the development of humanoid robots.
Okay, so he's not just talking about some abstract, existential threat, but actual robots walking around.
Right. He paints this pretty wild picture of the future where robots are everywhere, doing everything from cooking and cleaning to driving and even performing surgery.
Wow.
He believes that this kind of automation is inevitable, really, and that it'll have a profound impact on society.
Yeah.
He predicts that within a couple of decades, we'll see more robots than humans, which, raises all sorts of questions about the future of work, the economy, and even the very definition of what it means to be human.
That's a lot to take in.
It is.
But okay, so if robots are doing all the work, what happens to us humans? Do we just sit back and enjoy the ride while the machines take care of everything?
That's a question that Musk grapples with. He acknowledges the potential for widespread unemployment and economic disruption as automation takes over more and more jobs. But he also sees the potential for AI and robotics to, free us from these mundane tasks and allow us to focus on more creative and fulfilling pursuits.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a dystopian future he's envisioning, but one where humans and machines, they coexist and maybe even complement each other.
That seems to be his hope, yeah.
Yeah.
But he also stresses the importance of developing AI responsibly, ensuring that it aligns with human values and doesn't pose an existential threat.
He even brings up his work with Neuralink.
Yeah.
His company that's developing those brain-computer interfaces. Is he suggesting that we'll actually need to merge with machines to keep up with AI?
He doesn't go that far in this particular conversation, but he does express this belief that we'll need to find ways to enhance our own cognitive abilities, to stay ahead of the curve.
So it's not just about robots taking our jobs. It's about AI potentially outsmarting us altogether.
That's a fear that Musk has expressed before, yeah.
Yeah.
And it definitely adds another layer of complexity to the conversation.
Yeah, no kidding.
It raises these questions about the nature of consciousness, the limits of human intelligence, and the potential for AI to evolve in ways that honestly, we can't even imagine.
I mean, this is a lot to wrap your head around. It is. Yeah. It makes you wonder if Musk is just this brilliant visionary, or if he's spending a little too much time thinking about things that might never happen.
Well, I think that's part of what makes him so fascinating,
Yeah.
right? He's not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom, to speculate about the future,
Yeah.
and to push the limits of what's possible.
Okay, so we've explored Musk's thoughts on everything from climate change and big pharma to the rise of AI and this potential for a robot-filled future. What else is there to unpack in this deep dive?
Well, Musk also shares some interesting insights into his own personal philosophy, his views on government efficiency, and his belief in the power of what he calls first principles thinking.
First principles thinking, what's that all about?
Well, it's this problem-solving approach that Musk champions, where you break down complex problems into their fundamental truths, and then you build solutions from the ground up. He uses the example of designing a rocket, where instead of starting with existing rocket designs, you ask yourself, what are the basic physics involved? And then you work from there.
I mean, that sounds like a pretty powerful way to approach any problem, not just rocket science.
Exactly, yeah. It's about challenging assumptions, thinking outside the box, and not being afraid to start from scratch.
Yeah, it's amazing how he can go from, talking about robots taking over the world to like breaking down complex problems with this first principles thinking. It's like he's constantly challenging us to look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, and this unconventional thinking, it also applies to his views on government too. He's a pretty vocal critic of bureaucracy and inefficiency, and he argues that the government often, gets in its own way.
Right. He even proposes creating a whole new department. Right.
Yeah.
Something like, a Department of Government Efficiency.
Yeah, exactly. He uses this analogy of a football field with so many referees on the field that the players can barely move. It's his way of illustrating how, excessive regulation and red tape can just stifle innovation and progress.
Right.
He believes in streamlining processes.
Yeah.
Cutting unnecessary bureaucracy and really empowering people to get things done.
Okay, but that sounds great in theory, but how would that actually work in practice? I mean, the government is this massive, complex machine. Is it really possible to just make it more efficient overnight?
Well, Musk acknowledges that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be easy, but he believes that by applying this first principles thinking, by breaking down these problems into their core components and then rebuilding from the ground up, that we can create a more agile and effective government.
Interesting.
He even suggests offering generous severance packages to government employees who are let go, so they have a safety net while they transition to new opportunities.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty interesting approach. It's like he's not just talking about cutting jobs just for the sake of cutting jobs, but about actually rethinking how the government operates and finding ways to make it work better for everyone.
And he's also, a big proponent of free markets and limited government intervention. He argues that excessive regulation can stifle competition and innovation, which ultimately harms consumers.
Right, and he brings up tariffs too. He seems to believe that they often do more harm than good.
Yeah, he uses this simple example to illustrate his point. He asks us to imagine having to produce everything we consume ourselves. Growing our own food, building our own houses, making our own clothes.
Right.
It would be incredibly inefficient and time-consuming.
Yeah, it would be like going back to the Stone Age.
Exactly. And he argues that the same principle applies to nations. Specialization in trade. They allow countries to focus on what they do best.
Yeah.
Which leads to greater efficiency, lower costs, and a wider variety of goods and services for everyone.
Right.
He believes that tariffs, they often disrupt this natural flow of goods and services, which ultimately hurts consumers and hinders economic growth.
So he's advocating for a more globalized, interconnected world where those trade barriers are minimized and countries can just specialize in what they're good at.
Yeah, that seems to be his vision, but he also recognizes that trade needs to be fair and that countries need to protect their own interests as well.
Yeah.
It's about finding the right balance between, free trade and strategic protectionism.
It's fascinating how all these different threads, from freedom of speech and government overreach to AI and the future of work, they all seem to connect back to this core idea of individual liberty and empowering people to make their own choices.
It's like Musk sees this world where individuals are free to think for themselves, to challenge authority, to innovate to create their own destinies.
Right.
He's not afraid to question the status quo, to push boundaries, to challenge us, to think differently about the world around us.
Well, it's been a wild ride unpacking all these ideas and trying to wrap our heads around, Musk's unique perspective. But that's what makes the Duck Dive so fascinating, right? We get to explore these complex and controversial topics and challenge our own assumptions and hopefully come away with a deeper understanding of, the world and our place in it.
Absolutely. And remember, this deep dive, it's just the beginning. It's up to each of us to continue exploring these ideas, to engage in thoughtful discussions, and to form our own informed opinions.
Exactly. So keep those notes handy, share your thoughts with your friends, and keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.